Hi and welcome to the Gemhawks YouTube channel. I hope you're having a beautiful day today. For our free tutorial today, I'm going to bring to you a heavy metal connector. Now this has got multiple apertures for attaching chains or whatever else you want to work with, and it was born from necessity. So I love to wear mixed metals and I love to wear multiple chains. However, what I don't love is having 3 or 4 clasps at the back of my neck, causing a little bit of an argument with my hair. So what I decided to do the other day was to take a bunch of chains I had, all of different lengths, not really enough to make something spectacular or to use to hang a pendant from, and I thought I'd attach them all together. Let me just grab the key ring. A little bit like that, but as a necklace. And the instant I put it on, the whole thing flipped around and the chains got thoroughly knotted and it looked terrible and I was very sad. So I've come up with this little design, which I will show you how to create now, and I'll show you how I'm using it in my multiple chain necklace. Let's head down to the board and take a closer look. So first, to show you what I did, I got one of my super cheap copper washers out and gave it a little bit of extra texture. I added a length of strong chain at the back and some clasp closures, and then I connected that washer to the 5 different pieces of chain, and I really mixed the colours up. I went for copper in the connector, and then I had ivory, enamel and gold, silver, soft gold, bronze, and then bright silver as well. And the second I put it on, what happened is this thing just flipped around all over the place and the chains all got tangled up. So much so that this is what it now looks like, which is not ideal. So the idea was to have a slightly shorter length at the top and then graduating down in sizes, and the idea was that it would hang beautifully with this at just above the collarbones. Now unfortunately it didn't work out for me, so I'll show you what I've done on the other end of this chain and then I'll show you how we can achieve that. So with this design, all of the chains will hang in sequence and they won't kind of get quite so bunched up and jumbled together. And I've still got my textured copper washer at the centre of the design, but what I've done is I've added this frilling, I suppose, around the edge, and now when it sits just below the collarbone it doesn't twist because it's got the right kind of size. It's not as willing to move around, and the chains with their varying lengths help to keep everything all together. So the first thing we're going to do is to lightly texture our copper washer. Now if you're interested, this washer is 18mm on the outside diameter and 12mm on the inside diameter. It's about 1.25mm thick, just to give you an idea, but obviously you can use whatever you find at your local hardware store. So I'm going to use the ball side of my chasing hammer just to add some detail. It really doesn't take long to take a plain washer and make it look just a little bit more fancy. So I'll do that on the other side and then we'll start creating the frill around the edge. My little box of washers cost me about £7 or £8, I think. It's got over 100 washers in there and you can turn it into really simple, beautiful jewellery. And the amount of comments I got just wearing these, and they cost pennies to make. So do get yourself some little copper washers and a hammer and block and have some smashing fun. Let's head back down to the board and we'll make the next part of today's tutorial. For this next part of the tutorial, I'll be using 1.25mm or 16 gauge raw copper wire, and I'll be working directly from the reel. The tool I'm going to be using primarily for this, alongside my flush cutters, is the memory wire finishing pliers. It's absolutely my favourite tool of the year, and it's got 2 pins on it, one slightly smaller than the other. You can of course use standard round nose pliers or your bail making pliers. So the first thing I'm going to do is just unspool some of this wire. The reason I say work from the reel is because it's much easier to just go with the flow until you have a piece that's the right kind of size. So the first thing I'm going to do is just flush cut the end of that wire, and then I'm going to create a loop with the larger side. Now let me just grab my vernier and we can tell you what size this is. So the larger size is around about 4mm and the smaller is 2mm. You could use your round nose pliers to do this, but I do encourage you to grab one of these. They're not terribly expensive and they are very, very useful. It's just a little bit easier having it all on one tool. So what I'm going to do is to start off by creating a bit of a loop, and my spool of wire is going to get in the way and go all over the place. So if I create a loop that is just a little bit large, I think, but that's fine, we can run with it because I can just trim the end away. Got my hands on backwards today. There we go. Just going to take that end off slightly. So if I just fold that over, so we've got the first loop, and if you're making 2 of these because you want to make a necklace like mine, then just check to see that that is around about the same dimension. That's absolutely fine. So what we're going to do now is to pop that plier back in. I'll show you how to do it with those memory wire finishing pliers. Let me just bring that slightly closer to the board. I'm going to turn that all the way around and bring it back on itself, so you end up with this squiggle. So squiggle is what we want to make. Now for my piece, using the washers that I've described to you, so that was an 18mm outer diameter, what we need to do is create 13 of the large loops. And I'll show you how to finish that off at the other end. So if I pop the pin back in the hole, the idea of using one of these is that you get kind of a repeatable size and it just becomes quite a quick process. Slightly less quick when you're underneath a camera. So if you just bring that so that the ends are close together, you'll be able to see that that second loop is just a tiny bit larger than the first one. So to fix that, you can pop the larger pin back in and just rotate around until you shrink that down to the right size. It doesn't take much effort. And then if I pop the larger pin back in the larger side again, and then you can just hold that smaller pin down at the base in the right position and turn it around. And again, if that's not quite right for some reason, you can pop the pin back in without the large pin in the way and just rotate that around slightly until you get the right size. And they don't have to be identical. We're not really going to be that fussy. If you're doing it with a set of round nose pliers, ideally you would use marker pen on the pin of your round nose pliers just to make sure that you're creating the same kind of size loop again and again. So I'm just going to move that up slightly, then I'm going to hover that larger pin in and just rotate that all the way around. Now this time I've made it too small, and I just want to show you this so that you can see how to fix the issue as you go along. So if it's too small, you just pop that pin back in and roll it in the opposite direction, so that you can open up that size and just shift it down. So to try and make it slightly easier to see exactly what I'm doing and how quickly you can do it, I'm going to lift my camera up slightly away from the board and then zoom in. So hopefully you'll be able to see what's going on. So you can see the starting position is with the large pin on the outside and the smaller pin on the inside. Just draw that wire back around to the outside and just retract both of those pins. Now if you do see any size discrepancy, now is the time to deal with it. So if I pop the smaller pin in and just rotate that around slightly, I can make that larger. Once you're happy with that, just draw the wire back so it touches the preceding swoop, and then flick so that the larger pin is sitting outside, and you can bring that all the way back in. Now it's quite a firm wire to work with, so you just need to kind of push that off the pins, and then you will be able to build that up quite quickly. Now the nature of this design is that as it builds, because you've got small pin and large pin, it will start to curve around. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So I'll be back in a second once I have finished my 13th of those lovely swooshy lines. After you've reached your 13th of the larger loops on the outside, we're going to pop that pin in for one last time and then create a small loop coming back all the way around on itself. So just keep turning that over. We can make that a little bit smaller with a set of pliers in a moment. So let's trim away, which is always a relief because it means I don't have to hold this great big heavy reel of wire anymore. So what we're going to do is to close this loop up and just try and get it to be the same kind of size as the loop on the other side, so it's slightly larger. So if you do need to trim that away, just make sure that you're trimming to the flush side of your cutters. And then what we can do is just close that up manually. There we are. So you do need to make sure that this is in 2 dimensions. It's as flat as possible. And take a second, if there are any slightly uneven sections, just to try and even that up slightly. You'll find that there's a little bit of flexibility. You can always open them up slightly to even up where the lower or inside curves sit. Now obviously that doesn't look quite right, so let's grab a washer. What we need to do is to start curving that round a little bit more. So make sure that that's completely flat, and then what we're going to do is very gently prise apart each of the outsides. If you think of it as petals maybe, just prise apart the distance between each of those outside curves. So just a little bit here and a little bit there, trying to keep it as even as possible. And what you'll find is that you end up with then a complete flower design, or complete squiggle circle, however you want to think of it. What we're looking to do is to nestle this as close as possible together, making sure that it will fit round the outside of our chosen washer. Now there's a little bit of a gap, but I'm not overly worried about that, because the next thing I want to do is to hammer this form. As we hammer it, it's going to slightly spread out. So what we need to do is to support those 2 cut ends together as much as possible. And then I'm going to hammer around the outside, trying to keep that little aperture you see at the middle as round as possible. It's quite a sturdy wire, so it will take some time, and you can see already that it's starting to spring apart. That's absolutely fine. So what we're going to do is just open up by hand those last couple of bits and then compress them together so that they sit side by side but not one on top of the other. If they do go over the top and you strike down, you'll weaken the design, possibly shattering the wire as you go. You will need to spend a little bit more time than I have today to get that perfect, but what we're looking to do is to ensure that it fits all the way around. Now that looks pretty good. If it's still a little bit tight, you can open them up further, and you can also slightly open up some of those middle gaps as well. I've just seen that this isn't very even, so I'm going to pop those pliers in and just give that a little delicate touch to squish it to sit how I want it. And don't worry about your tool marks, because we are going to be hammering it again. So size-wise, now that's exactly how I want it to be. So the next thing that we're going to do is just spend a little bit more time making sure that we hammer that, not so much that it spreads out, but so that it's a little bit flatter than it presently is. And you will need to make sure that as you're striking, you hold it in the finished shape, so that the metal will all sort of start to sit together. So I'm going to take a few extra moments just to make sure that I'm utterly happy with that before we move on to the next stage. As with most things, taking your time, slowing down, making sure that you're completely happy with every step will give you a much more pleasant experience. So I've taken a few minutes just to make sure that I'm happy that all of those swooshes are equal to one another. If you find once you've hammered it that it becomes a little bit too large, you can just squish it together by bringing the gaps, the small gaps towards the centre, just slightly closer together. I've played around with that for a few minutes and I'm now happy that it fits around my hammered washer. So we'll look to the next stage now, which is to connect the 2 pieces together. We're now going to work on bringing these 2 pieces together. So we have our hammered washer and we have our connector squiggles. I think I'm going to call it a Medusa connector because it kind of reminds me of Medusa's hair. So we're going to just pop those 2 pieces together for now, and we're going to start not the first loop past a cut, but the second loop. So hold everything together allow around about 1.5 to 2 inches over the top. And what we're going to do to begin with is draw the wire all the way around and then poke the tail up inside the washer. Now we do need a little bit of tension, and what we're looking to achieve is tying the washer to that Medusa squiggle. So we're going to go for one wrap around both the Medusa squiggle and the washer, and then one wrap around just the washer, and you can grab those pliers to help you get some tension. Pull that all the way up through. Starting off is a little bit fiddly in terms of holding it, but it's not terrible. So I just want to make sure that that's nice and taut, so I'm going to just make sure that that's completely smooth, and then I'm going to wrap around the washer and the Medusa squiggles, bring that tail of wire up inside the washer, and then finish with 2 wraps just inside this little looped section that doesn't have an end. So all the way over. If you can get a 3rd wrap, all the better, but at least 2 wraps. It's a slightly heavier wire, so all is good. And what we're looking to do is to have that very last little cut bit of wire finishing up just inside the washer. So there's a tiny, tiny bit. If I just flip this over to the back, you'll see that I can just get the very last tail over the top and sitting on the inside of the washer. Once you're happy with it, give it a squish. Let's flip that back over to the front. So I'm just going to hold it in this orientation now, and what we're looking to do is to continue moving all the way around. So you can either push the leading edge through or push the tail through down the middle of that washer, making sure you get tension. I'll push the leading edge up inside that next little petal, and then so we're wrapping once around the washer only, and then once around the washer and the Medusa squiggles. Keep going until you get to the far end. Finish off inside the loop and bring that as close as you possibly can to the beginning. So beginning and end should be side by side and then very neatly and firmly attached to one another. As you move around, do make sure that you're keeping that Medusa squiggle outside of the washer. You don't want it coming up or underneath. Just make sure that it sits completely outside, and in that way it will be flatter when you wear it on the body. So do take your time laying everything out and make sure that you're happy that everything is sitting equally and opposite. For instance, I have added the connections to the chain up at the top, one link over from the end, and symmetrically opposite just over on the other collar. I've then left 2 kind of Medusa petals free, and then on the 3rd one down I'm going to be adding my first chain. So just to show you, on the right hand side here I have used my infinity chain link design. You could simply go for a basic rosary link if you prefer, or you could pop little clasps on the end so you can change things up if you prefer. If you want to see the infinity chain link, have a quick look. I'll link the video in the description as well as on the card on screen now, and then you can just play around with the length. So I've gone for the shortest at the top, the longest at the bottom, obviously, so that it in theory will have a lovely cascading finish to it. So I hope that you have enjoyed the chaos of today's video, the heavy metal multi-connector. So when I finished adding everything together with those infinity links, I will pop a photograph on the outro screen for you to take a look at. I hope that you enjoyed today's tutorial and find it helpful. You can also use these as pendants, and you can add multiple drops of little scraps of chain coming down off them. They make really fancy earrings, the centre of a tiara, all kinds of things that you can do with that Medusa style heavy metal connector. Have the most wonderful day, and I hope that you will join me again here in the future at the Gem Hawks YouTube channel. Bye for now.